My boss took credit for my project and won an award. He thanked everyone but me in his speech. I made sure his next project failed without me. I worked at a consulting firm for 5 years before everything fell apart. I started as a junior analyst and worked my way up to senior project lead through long hours and consistent results. I was good at my job because I actually cared about doing things right. I stayed late to fix problems. I came in early to prepare presentations. I answered emails on weekends because clients didn't stop needing things just because it was Saturday. My boss Victor noticed my dedication and used it against me. Victor had been with the company for 15 years and knew how to navigate office politics better than anyone. He understood that looking successful mattered more than being successful. He attended every executive meeting and happy hour and golf outing while his team did the actual work. He presented our findings as his insights. He discussed our strategies as his vision. He built his entire reputation on the backs of people like me, who were too focused on working to notice we were being robbed. The project that changed everything was a complete overhaul of operations for one of our biggest clients. They were hemorrhaging money due to inefficient systems and needed someone to fix it. Victor volunteered our team and then immediately handed the entire thing to me. He said I was ready for more responsibility. He said this would be great for my career development. He said he believed in me and would support me every step of the way. What he meant was he wanted results without doing any work himself. I spent 8 months on that project. I analyzed their entire operation from the ground up. I identified 17 different areas where they were wasting resources. I developed a comprehensive plan to streamline their processes and trained their staff on new systems. I worked 60-hour weeks for months while Victor attended conferences and took long lunches. He checked in occasionally to ask for updates he could report upward, but he never contributed anything meaningful. The results were spectacular. The client saved over $2 million in the first year after implementation. They were so impressed they signed an extended contract worth significantly more than their original engagement. Our firm's leadership noticed the success and wanted to recognize it. The company had an annual awards ceremony where exceptional projects were celebrated. Ours was nominated for the Innovation Award, the highest honor given to a single project team. Victor accepted the nomination on behalf of the team. He attended the selection committee meeting alone. He provided all the documentation and presented our work as if he had been personally involved in every detail. When the award was announced at the ceremony, Victor walked to the stage with a smile that made my stomach turn. I sat at my table expecting to be called up or at least acknowledged. I had done everything. Every analysis, every recommendation, every implementation step, every client meeting where problems were solved in real time. Victor held the award and gave a speech thanking the leadership team for their guidance. He thanked the client for their partnership. He thanked his wife for supporting his demanding schedule. He thanked his assistant for keeping him organized. He thanked the catering staff for the lovely dinner we were eating. He mentioned every person he could think of except the one who actually did the work. He never said my name. Not once. After the ceremony, colleagues came up to congratulate Victor while I stood alone by the bar. A few people gave me sympathetic looks because they knew the truth. Most people didn't know and didn't care because Victor was the one holding the trophy. He walked past me at one point and winked like we shared a secret. Like I was supposed to be grateful for the opportunity to make him look good. I started planning my exit that night. I didn't do anything dramatic or immediate. I just quietly began preparing for a future that didn't include Victor taking credit for my work. I updated my resume with detailed descriptions of what I actually accomplished on the project. I reached out to contacts at other firms who knew my reputation. I started having coffee with recruiters who had approached me over the years. Within 3 months, I had an offer from a competitor for a significant raise and a better title. I accepted and gave my 2 weeks' notice. Victor seemed surprised but not concerned. He wished me well and said he understood that people needed to grow. He had no idea what was coming. What Victor didn't realize was that I was the only person on our team who understood the client systems I had implemented. I designed everything from scratch with custom solutions tailored to their specific needs. I documented the basics, but kept the deeper institutional knowledge in my head, because I never imagined I would leave. When I left, that knowledge walked out with me. The client called 3 weeks after my departure with questions about the system. Victor couldn't answer them. He tried to assign other team members, but they didn't understand what I had built. He attempted to schedule a call with me, but I was under no obligation to help my former employer. I politely declined and said I was too busy with my new role. Problems started piling up. The client's IT director called Victor's firm on a Thursday morning. I was already settling into my new office when it happened. The director explained that the inventory tracking system was throwing error codes their team couldn't understand. The system I built used custom code that integrated with their existing databases in ways that weren't standard. Victor got the call and immediately assigned Celeste Harrington to handle it. Celeste was smart, but she'd only been with the firm for 8 months. She'd never visited the client site. She'd never seen their operation. She didn't know why I built things the way I did. Victor sent her an email with my basic documentation and told her to figure it out. I heard about this through a former colleague who still worked there. She texted me saying Celeste looked stressed. Celeste spent Monday and Tuesday trying to fix the problem. She reviewed my documentation, but it only covered the surface-level stuff. I had documented what the system did, but not how all the pieces connected. The custom integrations I built weren't explained in detail because I never thought I'd need to explain them to someone else. She called the software vendor on Tuesday afternoon. They told her they didn't build this system. They told her they couldn't support custom modifications. They told her she needed whoever designed it. Celeste went back to Victor and said she couldn't fix it without help. Victor told her to keep trying. Nolan Edwards sent Victor an email on Wednesday. I found out about it later when Catherine from HR mentioned it during our conversation. Nolan's email was polite but firm. He said simple questions were taking days to get answered. He said when I was there, he got responses within hours. He said they were paying premium rates for consulting support that wasn't showing up. He didn't threaten to leave, but the message was clear. The service quality had dropped, and he noticed. Victor responded saying they were working on the issue and would have it resolved soon. He didn't mention that Celeste couldn't figure out my system. He didn't mention that I was the only person who really understood what I'd built. Victor sent me a LinkedIn message on Thursday. It showed up in my inbox around lunchtime. The message was casual and friendly. He asked how I was settling into my new role. He asked if I was enjoying the change. He mentioned that he'd love to catch up sometime. I read the message twice. I took a screenshot and saved it to a folder on my computer. I didn't respond. I had no obligation to help Victor or the firm. They made their choice when they gave him that award. I closed LinkedIn and went back to work. My new office was smaller than my old one, but the window looked out over the city instead of a parking lot. I was working with Brooklyn Meadows on a proposal for a manufacturing company. Brooklyn was a senior consultant who'd been with the firm for 3 years. She was direct and honest and didn't play political games. We were sitting in a conference room reviewing the proposal when Lyle Schmidt walked in. Lyle was my new boss, and he ran the operations consulting division. He asked how the proposal was coming. Brooklyn said we were almost done, but wanted my input on the implementation timeline. Lyle read through what we had. He looked at me and said I should take the lead on the pitch. He said my expertise was exactly what the client needed. Brooklyn smiled and said she agreed. It felt good to have my work recognized. 2 weeks after I left, the client tried to process their monthly vendor payments. The procurement system I designed handled all their vendor relationships and automated the approval workflows. Something went wrong on a Friday afternoon. $500,000 in payments got stuck in the system. The automated approvals weren't triggering. Vendors started calling the client asking where their money was. The client called Victor's firm in a panic. Victor sent Celeste again. She spent 4 hours trying to figure out the approval workflows. I had built them with specific logic that accounted for the client's complex vendor relationships and payment terms. Celeste couldn't trace the logic. She couldn't find where the approvals were getting stuck. She called Victor at 7 that night and told him she needed help. Victor didn't have anyone else to send. Nolan Edwards called an emergency meeting for Monday morning. Victor attended along with 2 senior partners from the firm. I heard about the meeting from my former colleague who got the details from someone in Victor's department. Nolan was professional, but he didn't hide his frustration. He said the support level had dropped significantly since I left. He said they needed someone who actually understood the systems. He said they were paying for expertise they weren't receiving. Victor tried to explain that they were working through a transition period. One of the senior partners asked why the transition was so difficult. Victor said the systems were more complex than they initially realized. Nolan said that wasn't his problem to solve. Victor finally admitted something to the senior partners after the meeting ended. Owen Grimes, one of the partners, pulled Victor aside and asked him directly how involved I was in the implementation. Victor said I was more involved than he initially indicated. Owen went back to his office and pulled my personnel file. He found all my detailed project documentation. He found my weekly status reports. He found my meeting notes with the client. He compared it to the materials Victor submitted for the award nomination. The stories didn't match. Victor's nomination made it sound like he led the implementation with team support. My documentation showed I did almost everything while Victor attended conferences. Owen scheduled a meeting with HR. Catherine Haynes from HR sent me an official email on Tuesday. The email was formal and professional. She said the firm was reviewing the client situation and wondered if I'd be willing to consult as a contractor. She said they understood I had moved on, but hoped I might help during the transition. She offered a generous hourly rate. I read the email 3 times. I typed out a polite response. I said I appreciated the offer but had to decline. I said my commitment to my new employer prevented me from taking outside consulting work. I said there might be conflicts of interest given the competitive nature of our firms. I didn't mention that I had no interest in fixing Victor's mess. Catherine responded thanking me for considering it. The client's CEO got involved on Wednesday. He called the senior partners at Victor's firm directly. He said they were evaluating whether to continue the consulting relationship. He said the payment processing failure was unacceptable. He said they needed reliable support or they'd find it elsewhere. Owen Grimes looked at the numbers after the call. The client account represented 8% of the firm's annual revenue. Losing it would mean layoffs. It would mean reduced bonuses. It would mean a significant hit to the firm's reputation in the industry. Owen called another meeting with Victor. This time Catherine from HR was there too. They needed to figure out what went wrong and how to fix it before they lost the client completely. Rest of the meeting Owen scheduled went ahead without me. Victor sat in that conference room trying to explain to Catherine and Owen how the project worked when he couldn't actually explain anything. He talked about high-level strategy and vision while they asked specific technical questions he had no answers for. Catherine took notes on everything he said and compared it to my documentation. The gaps were obvious. Owen asked Victor directly why someone with his supposed expertise couldn't answer basic questions about systems he claimed to have designed. Victor said the implementation details were handled by team members. Owen asked which team members specifically. Victor said my name for the first time in months. Owen pulled out my weekly status reports and read them aloud. Every single one showed me doing the analysis, building the systems, training the staff, solving the problems. Victor's name appeared occasionally in sentences like, briefed Victor on progress, or Victor attended client dinner. Catherine asked Victor if he felt the award nomination accurately represented his contribution level. Victor said awards recognize leadership, not just individual tasks. Owen said the award specifically honored innovation and implementation excellence. He asked again if Victor personally innovated or implemented anything on the project. Victor couldn't answer that question honestly without admitting he did almost nothing. I got a call from Nolan Edwards the next day, asking if I'd be willing to meet with him and his CEO to discuss their consulting needs. He said they were evaluating their options and wanted to hear my perspective. I checked with Lyle Schmidt before agreeing to anything. He said this was exactly the kind of opportunity we hoped for, and told me to set up the meeting. I scheduled it for the following week at their offices. Brooklyn Meadows helped me prepare a presentation that focused on sustainable improvement and knowledge transfer rather than ongoing dependency. She said my approach was different from most consultants who tried to make themselves irreplaceable. I told her I'd rather teach people to solve their own problems than keep them paying me forever. She said that's exactly why clients would want to work with me. The presentation went better than I expected. Nolan's CEO was there along with their CFO and head of operations. I walked them through my philosophy about building internal capabilities and showed specific examples of improvements I could implement for them. The CEO asked pointed questions about why the service quality dropped so much after I left my old firm. I kept my answer focused on my approach rather than criticizing Victor directly. I explained that I believe in thorough documentation and knowledge transfer so clients can maintain systems independently. I said some consultants prefer to keep institutional knowledge locked up to ensure ongoing business. I said I preferred building genuine partnerships where clients felt empowered. The CEO nodded and said that aligned with what they were looking for. The CFO asked about pricing and timeline. Lyle Schmidt handled those questions while I focused on the technical discussion. After 90 minutes, they thanked us for coming in and said they'd be in touch soon. 2 days later, Nolan Edwards called to tell me they were awarding the contract to my new firm. He was professional about it, but mentioned they value working with consultants who actually do the work, rather than just taking credit for it. I thanked him and said I looked forward to working together again. Lyle Schmidt was thrilled when I told him. He said this account puts me on track for promotion to principal consultant within a year. He also increased my compensation immediately as recognition for bringing in major new business. I tried to downplay it, but he said landing a major client away from a competitor was exactly the kind of result that got rewarded at our firm. And the raise was significant enough that I could finally stop worrying about money and focus entirely on doing good work. Victor's firm lost the account officially the following week. Owen Grimes launched a formal review of Victor's project portfolio after that happened. They pulled files on every major project Victor claimed credit for over the past 5 years. They contacted former team members who worked on those projects. They discovered a pattern of Victor claiming primary responsibility for work done largely by team members who'd since left. 3 other consultants who'd worked under Victor had similar stories to mine. They'd done the actual implementation while Victor attended meetings and presented their work as his own. One of them had left the firm specifically because of credit issues. Another had complained to HR years ago, but nothing came of it. Owen realized the firm had a systematic problem they'd ignored for too long. Catherine Haynes contacted 3 former employees, including me, as part of the investigation. She sent a formal request asking if I'd be willing to provide documentation of my work on the award-winning project. I gathered everything I had. My weekly status reports showing every task I completed. My meeting notes with the client documenting solutions I developed. my training materials that I created from scratch, email threads where I answered technical questions while Victor was copied but never contributed. I sent it all to Catherine without adding commentary or complaints. The evidence spoke for itself. She thanked me for my cooperation and said the review was helping them understand what went wrong. The industry association that gave Victor the award received an anonymous complaint about the nomination materials being misleading. I didn't send it and never found out who did. The association opened their own review of the award criteria and verification process. They contacted my old firm asking for supporting documentation about Victor's role in the project. Owen had to provide the same evidence Catherine collected during the internal investigation. The association compared Victor's nomination materials to the actual documentation. The discrepancies were impossible to ignore. They sent Victor a letter saying they were reviewing the award and would make a determination within 60 days. I focused on delivering excellent work for my new client, instead of following all the drama at my old firm. I spent 3 weeks implementing improvements to their systems and training their staff to manage more functions internally. I documented everything thoroughly so they'd have resources after the engagement ended. I held training sessions where I taught their team not just what to do, but why each process worked the way it did. Nolan Edwards told Lyle Schmidt that I was exactly what they needed. He said their previous consultants made them feel dependent, but I made them feel capable. Lyle said that's the kind of feedback that builds long-term client relationships and reputation in the industry. Brooklyn Meadows and I became close friends as we worked together on various projects over the next few months. She was sharp and hardworking and didn't play political games. We had lunch together most days and talked about everything from work challenges to life outside the office. She told me she admired how I handled the situation with Victor by letting my work speak for itself, rather than engaging in drama. She said she'd seen other people in similar situations get bitter and obsessed with revenge. She said I just focused on doing excellent work and let the consequences happen naturally. I told her I didn't have energy to waste on bitterness. I told her the best response to being undervalued was proving your value somewhere else. 4 months after I left, Victor was quietly demoted from his leadership position and moved to an individual contributor role. The firm didn't announce it publicly, but word spreads fast through professional networks. People who worked at my old firm reached out to tell me what happened. Victor lost his team and his fancy office and his inflated title. He was assigned to work on projects under other people's supervision instead of leading them himself. His salary stayed the same, but his bonus structure changed significantly. The firm couldn't fire him outright without risking a lawsuit, but they could make it clear his leadership days were over. Several people told me he looked miserable every time they saw him in the office. Owen Grimes reached out to me personally to apologize for the firm's failure to recognize my contributions appropriately. He said the investigation revealed serious problems with how they evaluated and rewarded their consultants. He said they were implementing new policies to ensure proper attribution going forward. He asked if I'd consider returning in a senior leadership role with full credit for my previous work and a significant compensation package. I appreciated the apology, but politely declined the offer. I told him I was happy at my new firm and excited about the opportunities there. I told him I hoped the changes they were making would help other consultants avoid what I went through. He said he understood and wished me well. The letter from the industry association arrived at Victor's office 2 weeks after Owen apologized to me. The association reviewed their award process after receiving complaints about how Victor presented his role in the project. They examined the nomination materials Victor submitted and compared them to the actual project documentation. The differences were impossible to ignore. Victor claimed he led the analysis and developed the implementation strategy, but the records showed I did those things while he attended conferences. The association sent him a formal letter explaining that they were taking back the award because the nomination materials misrepresented who actually did the work. They copied the firm's leadership on the letter so everyone knew what happened. Victor's name got removed from the winners list on their website. The trophy he displayed in his office had to be returned. The whole thing became public record that anyone in the industry could find. Victor sent me an email 3 days after losing the award. The message was carefully written like a lawyer helped him draft it. He said he regretted any misunderstanding about project contributions and acknowledged my significant role in the client's success. He hoped we could both move forward professionally and wished me well in my career. The email felt hollow because it focused more on protecting him from legal problems than actually apologizing for what he did. But I saved it anyway because having written proof of his acknowledgement might be useful someday. I didn't respond because there was nothing to say that would change anything. Nolan called me the following week with an invitation that caught me off guard. His company was holding their annual leadership conference, and they wanted me to speak about the operational improvements we implemented together. He said the executive team was impressed with the results and thought other leaders in the organization could learn from our approach. I told him I'd never done public speaking at that level before. He said that's exactly why they wanted me, because I could explain complex ideas in ways that made sense to people actually doing the work. I agreed, but felt nervous about standing in front of hundreds of executives and managers. Brooklyn offered to help me prepare after I mentioned the speaking opportunity at lunch. We spent hours going through my presentation draft together. She asked tough questions that forced me to clarify my points. She made me practice the whole thing 3 times until I stopped looking at my notes every few seconds. She reminded me that I knew this material better than anyone in that room would. Her confidence in me made the whole thing feel less scary. The presentation happened on a Tuesday morning in a hotel ballroom filled with about 300 people. I walked onto the stage feeling my heart pound but forced myself to focus on the content instead of the crowd. I talked about how we identified waste in their systems and trained their staff to handle problems independently. I explained why building internal capability mattered more than keeping clients dependent on consultants. I showed specific examples of improvements and the money they saved. The audience asked smart questions during the discussion period and seemed genuinely interested in applying similar approaches in their departments. Nolan told me afterward that I did better than most professional speakers they brought in. 2 executives from other companies approached me before I left the conference. They said their organizations faced similar challenges and asked if I'd be interested in discussing how we might work together. I exchanged contact information with both of them and promised to follow up within the week. Lyle heard about the referrals before I got back to the office because one of the executives called him directly. He told me I was becoming valuable not just for my technical skills, but for bringing in new business through my reputation. Catherine sent me a final email the next day. She thanked me for cooperating with their investigation into Victor's conduct and project attribution. She said my case revealed serious problems with how the firm recognized consultant contributions and gave credit for work. They implemented new policies requiring detailed documentation of who did what on every project. Award nominations now needed verification from multiple team members before submission. She said these changes would help prevent other consultants from experiencing what I went through. The message felt like closure on that chapter of my career. I appreciated knowing that something good came from the situation, even though it didn't undo what happened to me. 6 months after I left my old firm, Lyle called me into his office on a Friday afternoon. He closed the door and told me to sit down, which made me wonder if something was wrong. Then he smiled and said the partners voted unanimously to promote me to principal consultant. The promotion came with a significant raise and equity stake in the company. He said I earned it faster than anyone in the firm's history, because I brought in major clients and delivered exceptional results consistently. The equity meant I now owned a piece of the business and would share in the firm's profits going forward. I thanked him, but couldn't quite process how much my situation had changed in half a year. I went from being invisible at award ceremonies to becoming a partner in a respected firm. Victor reached out one more time the following month asking if we could meet for coffee to clear the air. I stared at the message for a while thinking about whether there was any point in talking to him. Maybe he genuinely wanted to apologize properly without lawyers involved. Maybe he just wanted to feel better about himself by getting my forgiveness. Either way, I couldn't see how the meeting would benefit me. I'd moved on to better opportunities and didn't need closure from him. I sent a polite response declining the invitation and wishing him well. Some conversations weren't worth having even when people offered them. Nolan became one of my strongest professional supporters over the next few weeks. He recommended my services to colleagues at other companies who were looking for operational consultants. 2 of those referrals turned into signed contracts within a month. Both clients specifically mentioned that Nolan told them I focused on making their teams capable, rather than keeping them dependent. That reputation was exactly what I wanted to build in the industry. Having clients who trusted me enough to refer others felt more valuable than any award. An editor from an industry publication contacted me about writing an article on sustainable client relationships. They wanted perspectives on building long-term partnerships through knowledge transfer instead of dependency. I knew immediately this was my chance to present a different approach than Victor's method of hoarding information to stay essential. I spent 2 weeks writing and revising the article with Brooklyn's feedback. The piece explained how teaching clients to solve their own problems created stronger relationships than making them rely on consultants forever. It was a subtle response to everything Victor represented without mentioning him by name. Brooklyn and I grabbed lunch the day after I submitted the article. She told me she learned more about consulting excellence from watching me work than from any training program the firm offered. She said I showed her that doing good work and maintaining integrity weren't opposite goals. Her comment made me realize that being a good example mattered more than winning awards or getting recognition. The real measure of success was whether I helped other people become better at what they did. The news about my old firm losing more clients traveled through professional networks faster than I expected. I ran into someone from a different consulting company at a coffee shop who mentioned they'd heard Victor's team was falling apart. She didn't know I used to work there, but said the firm had a reputation problem now because several former employees were talking about credit issues and poor management. I thanked her for the information and changed the subject, but the conversation stayed with me. Victor's pattern wasn't just my experience anymore. Other people had similar stories and were finally comfortable sharing them. The firm's leadership must have realized they had a serious problem because their recruiting efforts became more aggressive. I saw job postings offering higher salaries and better benefits than they'd ever provided before. They were trying to attract talent to replace everyone who'd left, but the reputation damage made it harder. Good consultants talk to each other, and word spreads quickly about which firms treat their people well and which ones don't. Lyle pulled me aside one afternoon and asked if I'd be interested in mentoring some of the junior consultants on our team. He said my approach to client work and professional integrity set exactly the right example for people starting their careers. I agreed immediately because I remembered how much I would have valued that kind of guidance when I was starting out. The first mentoring session happened the following week with 3 junior consultants who'd been with the firm less than a year. I talked about technical skills and project management, but I also emphasized the importance of documenting your contributions and making sure your work was visible to the right people. Now, one of them asked how to handle situations where managers took credit for teamwork. I told her to keep detailed records, build relationships with clients directly, and know when it was time to leave if the environment didn't value her properly. The conversation felt more meaningful than any training program I'd ever attended. These people were learning not just how to do the work, but how to protect themselves and build careers they could be proud of. Nolan called me 2 weeks later asking if we could meet to discuss expanding our engagement with his company. I drove to their office expecting a standard scope discussion, but he had something bigger in mind. He explained that the operational improvements we'd made in the areas I originally worked on had been so successful that other departments wanted similar help. The procurement team needed better vendor management systems. The logistics group wanted to streamline their distribution processes. The finance department was looking for ways to automate reporting. He asked if I could lead a comprehensive assessment of their entire operation and develop a multi-year improvement plan. The project would be the largest engagement my firm had landed all year and would establish me as the lead consultant for their most important client. I told him I'd need to discuss it with Lyle, but I was definitely interested. He smiled and said he'd already called Lyle to make sure I'd have the time and resources to take it on. The relationship had evolved from me fixing problems Victor created to becoming their trusted partner for long-term strategic improvements. That felt like real success. The industry conference happened in March at a convention center downtown. I attended a panel discussion about operational efficiency and ran into Victor in the hallway afterward. He looked smaller somehow, like he'd lost weight or maybe just confidence. We made eye contact and he walked over with a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. He asked how I was doing at my new firm, and I said things were going well. He mentioned he was working on some interesting projects but didn't provide details. I asked a generic question about how the firm was doing, and he gave a vague answer about transitions and changes. The conversation lasted maybe 2 minutes before someone called his name from across the hall, and he excused himself. I felt nothing watching him walk away. No satisfaction from seeing him diminished. No sympathy for whatever struggles he was facing. Just relief that I wasn't in that environment anymore, and gratitude that I'd found a better path. Some people probably expected me to feel vindicated or triumphant, but mostly I felt glad to be moving forward instead of looking back. So Lyle asked me to help interview candidates for 2 new senior consultant positions the following month. He wanted my perspective on technical skills, but also on whether candidates would fit our firm culture. I sat in on 6 interviews over 2 weeks and paid attention to how people talked about their previous work. Some candidates used a lot of I language when describing team projects. Others gave credit to colleagues and talked about collaborative achievements. I asked everyone the same question about a time they had to give difficult feedback to a team member. The answers revealed a lot about how people viewed their relationships with coworkers. One candidate talked about a situation where a junior analyst made a mistake, and he publicly corrected her in a client meeting. He seemed proud of how he handled it. I made a note that he wouldn't be a good fit. Another candidate described coaching someone through a performance issue privately and celebrating when the person improved. That was the kind of colleague I wanted to work with. We ended up hiring 2 people who demonstrated both technical excellence and genuine respect for their team members. The article I'd written got published in the industry journal at the end of March. The editor told me it generated more reader responses than most pieces they published. Several people emailed me directly to share their own experiences with credit issues in consulting firms. A senior partner at a major company wrote that she'd dealt with similar problems early in her career and wished someone had addressed the topic publicly back then. A junior consultant thanked me for validating his decision to leave a firm where his manager consistently took credit for his work. An HR director asked if I'd be willing to speak to her company about creating better systems for recognizing employee contributions. The responses reminded me that my experience with Victor wasn't unique or unusual. The consulting industry had a widespread problem with how it attributed success and valued the people doing the actual work. Writing about it professionally without naming names had opened a conversation that needed to happen. The invitation to speak on a panel about women in consulting arrived in April. The event was a major industry conference with over 1,000 attendees expected. The panel topic was career advancement strategies, and the organizers wanted diverse perspectives from women at different career stages. I accepted and spent 2 weeks preparing my talking points. I decided to share my story about the award ceremony without mentioning Victor or my old firm by name. Instead, I focused on the lessons I'd learned about documenting your work, building direct client relationships, and recognizing when it was time to leave an environment that didn't value you properly. The panel happened on a Saturday morning in a conference room that was completely full. I spoke for about 8 minutes and could see people in the audience nodding along with my points. Several women came up afterward to thank me for addressing the credit issue directly. One of them said she'd been struggling with a similar situation, and my advice about documentation gave her a concrete action plan. Another told me she was going to start being more vocal about her contributions in team meetings. The conversations reminded me that speaking up about professional challenges helped other people find their own paths forward. An unexpected email arrived the next week from someone I recognized as a former colleague at Victor's firm. Her name was Jennifer, and we'd worked together on a couple of smaller projects before I left. She asked if I had time for coffee to discuss potential opportunities at my current company. We met at a cafe near my office, and she told me that watching how I handled the situation with Victor had inspired her to start looking for a new position. She said the environment at the firm had gotten worse after I left, because people realized the leadership didn't actually care about who did the work, as long as someone could present it well. She'd been documenting her own contributions carefully and building relationships with recruiters. I told her about the culture at my firm and how Lyle made sure everyone's work was recognized appropriately. She asked if we had any openings, and I said I'd check with our hiring manager. 2 weeks later, she had an interview scheduled and eventually got an offer to join our team. Having someone leave Victor's firm specifically because of how I'd handled things felt strange but also validating. My decision to leave quietly and build something better had created a path for other people to follow. The same client who'd been the source of all the problems with Victor sent me an email in May that caught me completely off guard. Nolan forwarded a message from their CEO saying they wanted to nominate me for the same Industry Innovation Award that Victor had won. The nomination would recognize the expanded work we'd done together and the long-term partnership we'd built. I read the email twice and then called Nolan to ask him to withdraw the nomination. He seemed surprised and asked if I was sure. I told him I appreciated the thought, but I'd rather be known for my work than for awards. The whole experience with Victor had taught me that recognition from the right people mattered more than trophies at ceremonies. Nolan understood and said he'd let the CEO know, but he added that everyone at his company knew the value I brought regardless of whether I won awards. That conversation mattered more to me than any ceremony ever could. Nolan and I had lunch the following week to discuss the progress on the expanded engagement. He told me their company culture had improved significantly since we started focusing on building their internal capabilities instead of keeping them dependent on consultants. The approach I'd taken from the beginning, teaching their team to solve problems themselves rather than always calling us for help, had changed how they thought about external partnerships. They still valued our expertise, but now they used it to make their own people stronger, instead of just outsourcing difficult work. He said I'd changed their whole approach to working with consulting firms, and they were applying the same principles to other vendor relationships. The comment reminded me that the best client relationships weren't about making yourself essential. They were about making your clients capable and successful on their own terms. That philosophy was the complete opposite of everything Victor represented, and it was working better than his approach ever had. My firm marked my 1-year anniversary with a team dinner at an Italian restaurant downtown. The private room had exposed brick walls and soft lighting that made everyone's faces glow warm. Lyle ordered appetizers for the whole table and made sure everyone had drinks before the food arrived. Brooklyn stood up halfway through the meal with her wine glass raised. She cleared her throat and waited until everyone was quiet. She said I'd elevated everyone's standards for what excellent work looked like. She talked about how I showed that doing things right didn't mean sacrificing your values or letting others take advantage. She said integrity and success weren't opposites, and watching me prove that over the past year meant more than any award ceremony ever could. The whole table clapped and I felt my face get hot. I thanked everyone for making the past year possible and meant it. These people valued actual work instead of just appearances. They recognized contributions instead of stealing credit. I'd found exactly what I needed without even realizing how much I'd been missing it. Catherine from my old firm sent an email 2 weeks later, asking if I'd be willing to present a workshop on project documentation and proper attribution practices. She said they were implementing new training programs based on the investigation findings. She mentioned that several junior consultants had asked specifically for guidance on protecting their work and getting appropriate recognition. I read the email 3 times trying to decide how I felt about it. Part of me wanted nothing to do with that place. Another part recognized that the problem was bigger than my personal experience. The next generation of consultants deserved better than what I'd dealt with. I replied saying I'd do it because the issue mattered beyond what happened to me. Catherine scheduled it for the following month and said they'd compensate me at my standard consulting rate. The workshop took place in a conference room I recognized from client presentations years ago. 20 consultants showed up, mostly junior and mid-level people who looked tired and eager at the same time. I'd prepared a presentation focused on creating systems where everyone's contributions stayed visible throughout project life cycles. I talked about documentation practices that protected individual work. I discussed having difficult conversations with managers about recognition. I shared strategies for building your own professional reputation through direct client relationships. 3 people raised their hands during the question period and shared their own stories about credit being taken. One woman described almost the exact situation I'd experienced right down to the award ceremony exclusion. Another guy talked about his manager presenting his analysis as original research. A junior consultant asked how to push back without damaging her career. I gave practical advice about documentation, communication, and knowing when to leave. After the session ended, 7 people came up individually to thank me. They said they'd felt alone in dealing with these situations. They appreciated having concrete guidance instead of just being told to work harder or be patient. One woman told me she'd already started updating her documentation practices based on what I'd shared. Walking out of that building for the last time felt different from when I'd left a year ago. I wasn't running away anymore. I was helping fix the problems I'd escaped. Lyle called me into his office the week after the workshop. He closed the door and gestured for me to sit in one of the leather chairs across from his desk. He said the senior partners had been discussing my trajectory with the firm, and they wanted to offer me a partnership track position starting immediately. The timeline would make me one of the youngest partners in company history if I hit the performance targets. He said my combination of technical skills and business development ability made me too valuable to risk losing to a competitor. The partnership track came with a significant raise, equity options, and a seat in strategic planning meetings. I asked what the expectations were, and Lyle laid out clear metrics around revenue generation, team leadership, and client satisfaction. Everything was concrete and measurable instead of the vague promises Victor used to make. I told him I needed a day to think about it even though I already knew my answer. He smiled and said that's exactly the kind of careful decision-making they valued. I accepted the partnership track position the next morning. The clients I'd brought in over the past year represented 15% of the firm's total revenue. My teams consistently delivered results that led to contract extensions and referrals. I'd built exactly the kind of reputation I wanted, based on actual work instead of political games. The success felt solid in a way Victor's stolen award never could have. I knew exactly what I'd accomplished because I'd done it myself. Every client relationship belonged to me because I'd earned their trust through competent service. Every team member respected me because I'd proven myself reliable and fair. Nobody could take that away by giving a speech or attending the right meetings. The partnership track position came with budget authority to hire my first team of junior consultants. I interviewed candidates for 3 weeks and selected 2 recent graduates who reminded me of myself at that age. Smart, dedicated, maybe a little too willing to let others take credit for their work. I made it clear from day one that their contributions would be recognized publicly. I added their names to client presentations. I mentioned their specific work in progress reports to senior partners. I made sure they attended meetings where their analysis would be discussed. During team celebrations, I called out exactly what each person had contributed. I never wanted anyone working for me to feel invisible the way I'd felt at that award ceremony. One of the new hires thanked me after her first month for being so specific about acknowledging her work. She said her previous internship supervisor had presented her research without attribution. I told her that would never happen on my team and meant it. Brooklyn got promoted to senior consultant in early fall. She came to my office right after the announcement with a huge smile. She said working with me over the past year taught her that success didn't require compromising your integrity. She'd watched me build strong client relationships through honest service instead of manipulation. She'd seen me advocate for my team without playing political games. She told me I'd changed how she thought about what kind of consultant she wanted to become. We celebrated her promotion with lunch at the same Italian restaurant where my anniversary dinner had been. She ordered champagne and we toasted to doing good work with good people. The conversation reminded me that the best outcome of leaving Victor's firm wasn't just my own success. It was creating an environment where other people could succeed without sacrificing their values. An email arrived a week later from someone who'd attended the panel discussion where I'd shared my story about credit theft. She said my willingness to speak publicly about the issue gave her courage to report similar problems at her company. Her manager had been taking credit for her team's work for 2 years. She'd documented everything carefully like I'd suggested. She filed a formal complaint with her HR department, and they'd launched an investigation. She thanked me for speaking up and said knowing other people had faced the same situation made her feel less alone. I wrote back congratulating her on her courage and offering to be a reference if she needed one. The exchange reminded me that the panel discussion had been worth the discomfort of sharing personal details publicly. My client relationships kept getting stronger as I focused on delivering genuine value and building their internal capabilities. Nolan called in October to tell me I'd set a new standard for what his company expected from consulting partners. He said other firms they worked with were starting to adopt similar approaches after seeing our results. The comment made me realize that good work had ripple effects beyond individual projects. Changing how one client thought about consultant relationships influenced how they approached all their vendor partnerships. They started demanding more knowledge transfer and less dependency creation. They expected consultants to make their teams stronger instead of keeping them reliant on external help. The shift represented exactly the kind of industry change I wanted to see. I accepted the partnership position officially in November and immediately used my new influence to implement firm-wide policies about project attribution, team recognition, and ethical business practices. I worked with Lyle and the other senior partners to create clear guidelines for documenting individual contributions. We established requirements for acknowledging team members in client presentations and award nominations. We added questions about attribution practices to performance reviews for all managers. The culture I'd wanted to see when I first started consulting was becoming reality at my new firm. People did excellent work and got recognized for it. Teams collaborated without worrying about credit theft. Junior consultants learned from senior partners who valued their development instead of exploiting their labor. I'd turned my worst professional experience into something that made the industry slightly better for everyone who came after me. The invitation arrived 18 months after I accepted the partnership position. The industry association wanted me to deliver the keynote address at their annual conference. The same event where Victor were accepted his award and given that speech thanking everyone except me. My assistant forwarded the email with a note asking if I wanted her to decline politely. I stared at the message for several minutes before responding that I'd accept. Lyle walked into my office an hour later with a huge smile. He'd heard about the invitation through his board contacts and wanted to congratulate me. He said having a partner selected as keynote speaker elevated the entire firm's reputation. I told him I was nervous about speaking to that large an audience. He reminded me that I'd presented to packed conference rooms dozens of times, and this wasn't different. I spent 3 weeks preparing my speech. I wanted to talk about building real success instead of manufactured reputation. I focused on the importance of recognizing the people who actually do the work. I wrote about creating sustainable client relationships through knowledge transfer instead of dependency. I practiced the delivery until every word felt natural. The morning of the conference, I stood backstage watching attendees fill the ballroom. There were at least 800 people in the audience. I recognized colleagues from across the industry, clients I'd worked with, consultants I'd mentored. Brooklyn sat in the third row, giving me an encouraging smile. The conference organizer introduced me with a summary of my career accomplishments that made me sound more impressive than I felt. I walked onto the stage and looked out at all those faces. I talked about integrity in consulting and what it means to build something that lasts. I discussed the difference between taking credit and earning recognition. I shared lessons about valuing your team and making sure everyone's contributions get acknowledged properly. I never mentioned Victor by name or described the specific situation that inspired my message. I kept everything professional and focused on positive principles rather than negative examples. The audience responded with genuine engagement. People nodded at certain points. Some took notes. A few looked uncomfortable, like my words hit too close to situations they'd experienced or created themselves. When I finished, the applause lasted longer than I expected. People stood up. The ovation continued for almost a minute. I walked off stage feeling like I'd said something that mattered. The rest of the conference became a series of conversations with people who'd heard my keynote. A senior consultant from another firm told me she knew exactly which situation had inspired my speech. She'd worked at my old firm years ago and experienced similar credit issues with different managers. A young analyst thanked me for addressing something nobody talks about openly. She said her boss had been taking credit for her work, and my speech gave her courage to document everything carefully. A client executive mentioned that my keynote made him rethink how his company evaluated consulting partners. 3 different people shared their own stories of being overlooked and having to fight professionally to get recognition. Each conversation reminded me that my experience wasn't unique. The problem existed throughout the industry. Speaking up about it publicly mattered more than I'd realized. I flew home the next day feeling genuinely satisfied with my career for the first time in years. I loved the projects I was leading. I enjoyed mentoring the talented consultants on my teams. I'd built a firm culture where people's contributions actually mattered and got recognized appropriately. The success felt earned and real in a way that award Victor accepted never could have. My calendar stayed full with meaningful work. Clients valued my expertise and recommended me to their networks. Junior consultants sought my guidance because they knew I'd help them grow instead of exploiting their effort. I'd created exactly the professional life I wanted. Looking back now, I can see that losing credit for that project became the catalyst for finding a better path. If Victor had acknowledged my work at the award ceremony, I probably would have stayed at that firm for years. I would have kept accepting his pattern of taking credit because I didn't know anything different was possible. His betrayal forced me to leave and discover that other firms operated with actual integrity. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be now, doing work that matters with people who value both results and how those results get achieved. Sometimes the best revenge isn't making someone fail. It's just building something better than they ever could and letting that speak for itself.